When Marines march through LA and vaccine experts are purged from public health, this isn't politics as usual. It's an authoritarian dress rehearsal. Trump's second term isn't a sequel. It's a siege on democracy, decency, and truth. The question now isn't if he'll break the law. It's who'll stop him.
Live pictures from Los Angeles as we come on the air right now. People are continuing these protests after what has widely been reported as the Trump administration's escalation. 700 Marines now deployed by the administration, arriving today. You can see some of the indications of this type of military presence on American streets. This is a rare effort to deploy U.S. troops inside the U.S. for what would seem like policing purposes, although the details are in debate, and that's what will really matter legally. A move could be illegal. It depends on what the Marines are ultimately tasked with doing and what they do. California's governor pushing back, suing Trump for allegedly illegal use of federal forces. And today, California is formally seeking an emergency restraining order to stop any further activity by the Marines you just saw there, who are just getting started, and the National Guard troops. We can tell you judges are usually hesitant, though, to intercede in these kind of conflicts in real time. Overall, the initial protests over these ICE raids have clearly morphed into something larger. The president seeking this conflict, seeking a chance to use what are clearly extraordinary powers, unusual powers, rarely deployed federal powers, while overruling the sitting governor of the state. Democrats have been pushing back. They are taking him to court, as mentioned. But overall, in what is still an early period in the second term of this unusual Trump presidency, the nation is facing a wider reckoning over a president who confesses what are improper goals, recently arresting some opponents in the Democratic Party because they disagree with him. In a case that, again, a lot's going on, you're forgiven if it's hard to keep track, but that case, that arrest, very dramatic, of a Democratic mayor in his own city, dropped. The case fell apart. The lawyers tasked with defending the arrest admitted a type of wrongdoing in court. That mayor is now suing the Trump administration, but that would appear to be an improper use of force by evidence of the fact that they didn't even stick with the case. But remember, this week, as we see soldiers in the streets, the president is threatening the same type of arrest against the California governor in this clash, Governor Newsom. He's basically said, bring it on. But that is where we are. And Trump is leaning into this very controversy over the use of these powers in the Guard, warning of big force against protesters, which would sound like people exercising constitutional rights if they peacefully protest. But that's his warning to people who might come to the planned D.C. parade this weekend.
If there's any protester who wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way, for those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force.
Let's take this seriously. Protests met with big force. The public warning from the sitting president. This isn't campaign rhetoric. This isn't some lurching, sloppy statement somewhere along the line being taken out of context. This is being said right now by your president as he tests whether he can get away with putting Marines in the streets. And not just any streets, the streets of California, which he has publicly said he views as the type of place filled with the type of Americans that he wants to patrol, that he views as some type of opponent. But like every president, Donald Trump took an oath in public to uphold the Constitution. And so we can report as news, even if it sounds like bad news, that the president is quite blatantly undercutting the oath he took today by vowing big force for people exercising constitutional rights to assemble and protest and speak while using this rare, courts haven't said whether it's illegal or not, but rare instance of extreme military-style federal force in California. You have the statement matched by the action. This week's clash, which clearly is not an overnight event, is one of Trump's choosing. What started with deportation powers is now about limits potentially on Trump's power. The president does not have the legal power to police daily life in states and cities. That is what states do under federalism. That's why you have state officers, state representatives that you vote for, local police, not federal agents running through your home. The president also doesn't have the legal power to silence or threaten dissent, although it is clear that he welcomes a clash on those terms. As for the actual protests, let's tell you here in the news what we know. They have occurred now across roughly 4 days. Hundreds of people have gathered in different locations. On Monday night, there were about 100 arrests. There were some violent incidents. The situation required law enforcement, which traditionally patrols these areas. But these gatherings, to be clear, although there are some dramatic moments in footage, just by the scale, and we've covered this and we have our reporters on the ground there, these gatherings are not anywhere near Los Angeles' largest security challenges, from championship celebrations to the city's Oscars or the Grammys, or in the realm of politics, the much, much larger protests that ripped across that city and others in 2020 over BLM. And so we mentioned that to remind you, neither LAPD or the sitting governor concluded that federal backup was necessary. And yet, federal force is being crammed into that city now, including Marines. Donald Trump's intervention involves 4,000 total National Guard troops, because he's doubled the number now. The cost to taxpayers is over $130 million. And in the streets, in court, and in public, the opposition and many Democrats are pushing back.
The fact of the matter is, Donald Trump is not looking to create peace. He's not looking to calm the situation. He's looking for a fight. He's sending in the National Guard and the Marines to try to inflame the situation because he's looking for an excuse, likely, to be able to declare some kind of martial law.
This clash has now brought out more protests in other places, people deciding to speak up, to be counted, that they see what's happening in Los Angeles. And we've seen this in San Francisco, Austin, Atlanta. People are taking action. They want to stand, they say, many of them from the signs and the coverage we have, against an effort by Donald Trump to take a showdown that involved a lot of peaceful protest and, as mentioned, some prosecutable incidents. But for him to try to take that and turn it into the rationale to deploy the National Guard or now the Marines in these other places, people are standing up. And this is a democracy. So against pressure, there is still, until and unless the Constitution actually breaks and we live in a different kind of country, there is obviously, this is just a fact, a role for the people to stand up or stand down, to get engaged or sit it out. But it's a decision in a democracy people still make, which is a point that our colleague Rachel Maddow made on MSNBC just last night, which we can observe drew some headlines about how to respond to this test that President Trump clearly wants.
Will he succeed? Will he get what he wants? And the answer to that will not be found by looking at him or by watching his actions. The answer to that question will come from the people of this country. The most important story of our time is this one. What is this country going to allow him to do?
That cuts to the heart of it, doesn't it? They call it a pause when the country rejected him and rejected efforts to steal the election. Or you could call the Biden era as still suffused with a type of MAGA backlash. People could feel that things still weren't all that normal then. But we are clearly now in the shank of the Trump era as he is unbridled in the second term. And the thing about it is what our colleague there, Rachel, said, and what I think resonates clearly, factually, is it's not. And you can count it from his victory in 2016. You can call it a pause when the country rejected him and rejected efforts to steal the election. Or you could call the Biden era as still suffused with a type of MAGA backlash. People could feel that things still weren't all that normal then. But we are clearly now in the shank of the Trump era as he is unbridled in the second term. Decide to do about it. Because there's no waiting for the next moment when the troops are in the streets and the National Guard is there and the president is saying big force against the protests this weekend and the Democrats are being rounded up and arrested. We're there. So, how do you challenge the alleged abuses of power? These tests of dissent and democracy? Well, we see it continuing as we monitor how people are acting out there. And I believe we have NBC reporter David Noriega there. And the president is saying big force against the protests this weekend, and the Democrats are being rounded up and arrested. We're there. So, how do you challenge the alleged abuses of power? These tests of dissent and democracy? Well, we see it continuing as we monitor how people are acting out there. And I believe we have NBC reporter David Noriega joins us live from Los Angeles. David, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Ari.
Great. I know we were just setting this up, and now we've been able to get your shot. So go ahead and tell us what you're seeing now.
Here, Ari, walk with me for a moment. I want to show you, because this is illustrating a really key dynamic that has started to play out over just the last day. So I'm going to walk between the line separating on my right LAPD riot officers, and on my left a frankly pretty small group of protesters and a good amount of media. Now, what I've seen happening beginning yesterday is a truly overwhelming show of force by local law enforcement, by LAPD, by LA County sheriffs, by sheriff's departments of other surrounding counties, by police departments of other surrounding cities in LA County. For the most part, as seems to be the case right now, they outnumber protesters pretty substantially, and what they're doing is they're deploying these tremendous numbers of officers, in many cases deploying flashbang grenades, tear gas, other forms of less lethal munitions to prevent these kinds of gatherings from gaining steam, from gaining numbers, or from getting rowdy in the way that we've seen them get in the last couple of days. The thing to keep in mind here, Ari, is that Mayor Bass, Governor Newsom, the local authorities in California are basically on a mission to prove to Donald Trump, to prove to the city, to prove to the country that they can handle this kind of unrest, that they've done it before, that they have the numbers, that they do not need the Marines, they do not need the National Guard to handle this. Now, I will say this started getting serious here today. Just in the last hour or so, there was a group of people directly in front of the federal building in the federal detention center, which is about in the middle of this block, Alameda, between Commercial and Temple, where most of the action has been concentrated for the last few days. That group was small and 100% peaceful, which again, these groups haven't always been in the last few days, but in this instance, the group was being 100% peaceful. They were chanting, there was music, they were, expressing themselves. At that moment, National Guard and federal tactical units deployed flashbang grenades. LAPD came in on both sides of the street to disperse them, and that is what I expect to see for the next few hours. They're trying to nip this in the bud. They're trying to prevent any kind of momentum in these protests before we see anything like what happened on Sunday, Ari.
And David, you mentioned numbers. What would be the number of people in the place you're at?
Number of protesters, I'm going to say definitely less than 100. It's in the few dozen. The police, by the way, I want to show you right now, they're retreating. This is the line that I just walked. They're now walking back towards the federal building. I don't know if it's because they've determined that the number of protesters has diminished to the point where there no longer needs to be pushing us out towards the other street in the intersection. The other thing that the police here have to balance is keeping these are extremely busy streets in the middle of downtown LA that they want to keep open as much as possible. In terms of numbers, Ari, an interesting number that I heard yesterday from a police captain on scene here, this is an informal kind of back of the envelope number. There's a police vehicle coming in, which may be one of the reasons they pushed us back. He told me that LAPD had somewhere between 800 or 900 officers deployed just to the downtown area last night, and then about half that supplements from other law enforcement agencies, sheriffs, other police departments. So, well over 100 police officers, well over 1,000 police officers, which based on, that was yesterday. I imagine the numbers are the same or even higher today. That is substantially more than the number of protesters we're seeing downtown. And last thing, Ari, this is important. It's a very small footprint here. This is a pretty small area of downtown LA. LA is a massive city. You go 5 blocks in any direction, and it's like none of this is happening, Ari.
David Noriega reporting on the ground. Thank you. I want to turn to our special guest book tonight, Senator Cory Booker, a senator from the state of New Jersey, joining us after many people remember the history-making address you gave where you discussed the stakes and how this is about democracy. Your response to what we're seeing in California right now, and do you believe the president has the authority to deploy Marines for what looks like potentially domestic policing?
Well, again, you laid it out clearly. This is about the rule of law. and it needs to be followed by everyone. We are a nation of a law, not a nation governed by the whims of a president. And I've looked very clearly at the statute. Article 10 of the Federal Code, Section 12406 says it very, very clearly that the president must. It says that it shall go through the governor's office before taking a step like this. He did not. He went around the governor's office. The head of the LA police has said that this is causing severe challenges in terms of logistically and coordinating their own response. This is making the situation in Los Angeles worse, not better, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars for American taxpayers. And so, again, this is the president, yet again, exceeding his authority. This is the president, yet again, instigating more problems that he claims he is solving. It is the way he's been running immigration. Remember, his immigration steps again and again and again have been violations of the law. Don't take my word for it. Take the Supreme Court, a third of which he put into place, that ruled 9-0 against him in his violations of our laws, in this case, our due process laws. This president is finding every reason to try to declare emergencies and reach for extra powers that he's not justified in using. I believe in the rule of law. I believe in public safety. I believe in abiding by that, from people who are protesting in the streets all the way to the presidency. There's an obligation to follow the law. Los Angeles could take care of those people who are breaking the law and causing violence. But we, the people of the United States of America, we are the accountability of a president who, again, is overreaching his power, overstepping his authority, and trashing our Constitution.
Do you think it is constructive to have other protests around the country? And what do you say to the point that we actually saw in the reporting just now, where the ratio is more than 1-to-1? You have more than one officer for every single person in what our reporter described was a relatively minuscule protest of under 80 people, which raises the question whether, to some degree, Trump wants some of these clashes and wants them to be larger groups of protesters.
Well, the president is trying to say that protest and dissent is unpatriotic. I believe when you have a president who is violating the laws of our land, not to protest, not to dissent, is unpatriotic. And so peaceful protest has been how we all got here. I am standing here because of a product of people who peacefully protested. My mother, in doing sit-ins, in doing the March on Washington. Protest is a part of our democracy. It is vital and is essential. Violence, we should all abhor that. Those people should face consequences. But right now, with a president who continues to violate the laws of our land, overstep his power, violate the checks and balances, due process, and more, protest and dissent is the greatest act of patriotism.
Let me ask you about the immigration approach, which did catalyze some of this. Bottom line, there's a hierarchy in how immigration enforcement's worked for many decades, because there are people where it's a bigger priority to address or deport them. And then there's a heck of a lot of people that are part of the real society and economy of this country, even if they're technically undocumented from 20 years ago or what have you. The administration has made a change, and as you know, it's much farther than other Republican administrations. Some of the reporting on this here from the Wall Street Journal, the White House marching orders that sparked the crackdown they write about in LA, agents didn't need to develop target lists of immigrants suspected of being in the U.S. illegally, a long-standing practice. And I think we have this, I can put this up on the screen here, referring to Stephen Miller, who's well known. Instead, Miller directed them to target this now known Home Depot for laborers who typically gathered for hire or convenience stores. Stephen Miller, according to the journal, betting that a handful of agents could go on the streets of Washington, D.C. and arrest 30 people right away. What is your view of this type of enforcement that basically chucks the old model of saying, yeah, if somebody might be a violent offender or tied to a terrorist organization, of course you go after them, but now going after people who are part of the real economy. They go to get a job in a parking lot. I think a lot of people know about this kind of thing.
Look, the president made a commitment that he was going to target precious law enforcement resources towards violent criminals, towards gang members, to the people who are threatening other Americans. He is violating that promise and that commitment, but he's going further than that now. He's violating common standards of decency. He is being cruel. He is separating families. They are raiding schools and hospitals. They are setting people up who are trying to abide by the law and go to their proceedings, their immigration proceedings. This violates our collective values. It undermines our economy. It actually undermines our public safety in two principal ways. Number one, it draws law enforcement away from doing the things that are necessary to protect us. And number two, it's created such a culture of fear within so many communities. I'm seeing this in New Jersey, that you have people that are even afraid to go to the police and report crimes or offer witness testimony against criminals. This is a violation of our values. It hurts our economy. It undermines the fabric of our community. And this is what the president, exactly what the president said he would not do. And we are right to speak up against it. And some of the tactics they're using, people that are showing no insignias on their uniforms, with their masks covered, throwing people in unmarked vehicles, this actually violates the law as well. And it violates, frankly, an understanding of what other law enforcement officers are now pointing out, making our law enforcement officers more unsafe in communities. And so this is wrong in so many ways. And again, America, we have to speak up and speak out about it.
Understood. And really important to hear where your head was at here with the inflection point, the seriousness of what we're facing as a nation right now. Senator Booker, I want to thank you.
When a president deploys Marines to police peaceful protests on U.S. soil without legal basis, you don't call it leadership, you call it fascism light. Trump isn't preserving order, he's provoking chaos to justify dictatorship. California resists, the courts hesitate, but make no mistake, democracy itself is under siege in real time.
As the nation observes Marines working on the ground in Los Angeles tonight, many are really wondering, is this even legal? Now, California officials think these deployments are not legal. They are pressing the point in court. They're intending to get the judicial branch to side with them in what is, among other things now, a clash between state and federal power. Late today, California is seeking emergency relief to try to stop these deployments we've been telling you about. A new filing states that Trump's federal antagonization with soldiers in the streets has already caused, quote, real and irreparable damage to L.A. Now, that statement there, which is a claim in a lawsuit, right, that refers to basically one of the required standards to even get a judge to intervene on an emergency basis. California is arguing Trump's deployment must be stopped immediately. It's a push that comes as the president has now doubled the total guard forces to 4,000. Under law, it's pretty simple. U.S. troops cannot be deployed for domestic law enforcement. You can't send the army to someone's house to do a drug search or to look for things. That's always been the case. In fact, it is a key line to prevent any potential abuse of military powers against U.S. citizens. And there's really only one rare instance where you could have an exception to that. And that's if there's basically the kind of insurrection or rebellion that could then be invoked to suspend what otherwise is the limit on the military from operating on our streets. Now, if you're thinking, okay, well, that sounds rare, it is. Indeed, in our entire modern era, the only violent effort to overthrow the U.S. government on par with an insurrection in modern history was the recent MAGA effort to overturn the loss of then outgoing President Trump in 2020. Republican leader McConnell called that effort a violent insurrection. And in court, it rather infamously led to sedition convictions, which this president, the beneficiary of that effort, later pardoned on his very first day in office. The New York Times notes that when violent protests originate from the right, Trump has chosen to downplay the violence or suggest the protesters have a noble cause. When it comes from whatever he deems the left, Trump expresses open desire for law enforcement and the military to harshly crack down on them. And so what we're witnessing right now is the extension of this upside-down land. In other words, it is an insurrection that would justify only under our legal history this kind of exception. And the last time we had an insurrection, you may recall, President, was Trump leaving office. So at that time, he appeared to welcome, court, praise, and later pardon those violent and horrific attacks on police, while now he wants to use the rhetoric and the language of law and order as if anyone would believe it who lived through that now convicted sedition.
They spit, we hit. And I told them, nobody's going to spit on our police officers. Nobody's going to spit on our military, which they do as a common thing. They get up to them this far away and then they start spitting in their face. That happens, they get hit very hard.
Donald Trump is saying he doesn't like it when they do bad things to police, and even an act like spitting will be met with hitting. But of course, it was a lot of hitting of police that he formally embraced and condoned. People who'd been convicted of attacks on police were let out of jail very early, let out of prison very early, because he said it's all good. And that has to be relevant here when A, you have legal claims involving the exception of insurrection, and B, a country looking up and saying, what is this all about? Is this really about public safety and order? Is this even really about immigration? Or is it about an obvious, proven double standard of a sitting president who has embraced some people who attack police while then turning around and claiming he's concerned about that very thing? Now, the use of the Marines is extremely rare. Governor Newsom vowing a suit over this deployment, saying it's a blatant abuse of power, which he posted online. Under law, it's very clear. You need an actual rebellion. We're talking about a military level challenge to the government. Think civil war or violent ongoing organized insurrection. The AP notes that officials have scrambled to even establish new rules to guide the U.S. Marines in how to patrol citizens, because as I just told you, it's not something they even normally are supposed to do. So they don't have a bunch of rules for it because they don't patrol American streets. There are documents that state warning shots would be prohibited, troops would be directed to de-escalate, but they could also act in self-defense, the documents say. And so the question is, why are we making up these rules on the fly? And does it sound like a good idea to thrust Marines who were recruited and trained to go patrol abroad to now figure out when and how to shoot Americans in, quote, self-defense? Well, we have a Marine who also writes laws, Congressman Seth Molton, a veteran, joining us next.
California's lawsuit makes it plain. Trump's actions have caused irreparable harm. Deploying military force under false pretenses echoes his double standard. Pardoning January 6th seditionists, punishing peaceful dissent. This isn't law enforcement. It's an illegal power grab masquerading as national security. He's not fighting crime. He's fighting democracy.
The troops that are being deployed here are not being deployed for our purposes. We did not request through the sheriff, through the mutual aid system, for National Guard troops. What are the troops in LA to do? And that is unclear to pretty much everybody at this time.
That's the LAPD police chief basically saying unclear what these troops are supposed to do, and they don't need them. We're joined now by Congressman Seth Molton of Massachusetts. He's a veteran, a former U.S. Marine captain who served 4 tours of duty in Iraq. As mentioned, is now a lawmaker, so really at the intersection of these questions. Welcome.
Good to see you, Ari.
Should the Marines be on the streets of L.A. tonight?
No, they should not, because Trump is breaking the law to send them there. This is clearly against every provision in the law which requires an insurrection to send Marines into a city. There's no insurrection going on. There are violent protests, but not an insurrection. It's also not what the Marines are trained to do, and they haven't been requested by anyone in Los Angeles. Remember, Trump and the Republicans are supposedly the party of states' rights, right? We're not even going to make sure that we preserve the right for women to make their own health care choices nationwide. But here we're going to shove active duty troops down the throats of LA, whether they want them or not.
Yeah, and it looks like what you see out of a military state. It looks like the exact thing that most presidents have said. We fight abroad and defend at home. That you don't want to live in a place where military war tools are being used against the domestic citizenry.
Well,
go ahead.
Unless you're Donald Trump, though, because this is Donald Trump's dream. He's never respected what we Marines do overseas. Remember, this is the guy who attacked John McCain for getting captured in Vietnam, right? He's never respected what Marines do overseas, but he's always wanted to use them to enforce his political agenda here at home. This is a dream for him. And not only is it using troops, politicizing the military for his political goals, but it's also distracting everybody's attention from what should be the big story of the week, which is this disastrous bill he's shoving through Congress that's going to take health care away from millions of people while exploding the deficit. So this is exactly Trump's playbook. This is exactly what he wants to do. The rest of us need to stand up for the Constitution and the law.
The written powers that he claims to do this assert that he could do it anywhere in the country, not just in California. The deployment of the Marines is the first time that's happened in a long time, and certainly in this term. Do you view this as a test case? The courts may stay out of it for a lot of reasons, including if it kind of calms down. Judges love a mootness argument. They love to say, well, this was a problem 2 weeks ago, not today. We'll deal with it when it comes up. And so we may not get a negative precedent out of this. We may just get a few Marines. I mean, 700 is not like what we had in Iraq or what you've done. A few Marines were there once, and he could do it again. Do you view that as a problem where they're exploiting the fact that the courts may not act quickly to then claim a precedent for something that wasn't actually authorized?
Absolutely, and we know he's wanted to do this since his first term when he asked then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, why he couldn't just shoot protesters in the legs when they were protesting out in front of the White House. His chairman, Milley, and Secretary of Defense at the time told him, you can't do that. Well, now he's handpicked Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, who wrote a book about politicizing the military, because I think Donald Trump believes that if he asks that question of Pete Hegseth, he'll say, go ahead and shoot.
You've written and warned about your view of exactly that politicization. Reading from a piece you wrote in February, you said Trump doesn't care about the rule of law. He doesn't want military officers who do care about it getting in his way. That's the difference between a dictatorship and a democracy. You wrote that early on here because you were concerned we could be heading towards the end of a term where if he and the Republicans, let's say there's a Republican successor, be it his vice president or someone else, if they win fair and square, that's the system. If they lose, we have the history that last time he didn't accept that, and now he's trying to involve the military more. What are the guardrails, and what is Congress doing to make sure that the military stays out and then follows the lawful transition of power, at the end of any such term?
I mean, candidly, Ari, Congress is doing nothing because under Republican leadership, they won't even touch this. They have absolutely no courage to stand up for the Constitution that they swore an oath to protect and defend. And so Trump is burning the Constitution. He's running all over it. And we already know that he's perfectly willing to overthrow democratic elections. Now we know he's willing to use the military. You put those two things together and you have a classic dictatorship where the guy at the top uses the military for political ends to get his way. That's not a democracy. That's a dictatorship. And clearly that's what Trump has in mind.
Wow. The other piece of this is not at that grand scale, but it's something you know a lot about. And I wanted to ask you is, what about the perspective of people who sign up for our military, who serve as you did, but they make a commitment to go serve under certain plans and rules, certainly a code of conduct. Very few of them are ever told, by the way, you might have to walk around LA with rules on the fly and take your weapons of war and try not to kill anybody. But if you get attacked, who knows? What do you view the bind that this order and this effort puts these Marines in right now?
No Marine signs up for this. No Marine signs up to attack fellow Americans. Trump doesn't understand that, of course, because he dodged the draft. He let someone else go to Vietnam in his place. But Marines don't want to be there. Marines don't want to be doing this. And frankly, I'll tell you, as a Marine veteran and a sitting lawmaker, I have never gotten more questions from active duty officers about how to think about disobeying orders, because they know they may very well have to disobey an unlawful order from the commander in chief.
Really appreciate your experience and quite frankly, your candor tonight on some of these tough issues. Congressman Molton, thank you so much.
Good to see you, Ari.
Appreciate it. We are covering a lot of different stories tonight, so we will go back inside the federal courtroom where there is a quest for justice for the disgraced mogul Sean Diddy Combs. There have been a lot of striking witnesses. It's an important case we've been following, so we have that update later. But first, RFK Jr. breaking his vow, ousting a panel of vaccine experts. It is the horror story that his critics warned about and that some are saying tonight he lied about under oath. That's next.
Veterans and Marines are sounding the alarm. Trump's unlawful deployment turns protectors into pawns. LA never asked for troops, but authoritarian fantasies don't need consent. This isn't public safety. It's performance tyranny. When peaceful protesters are met with troops, we're no longer watching governance. We're watching a regime take shape.
What would really happen if RFK Jr. actually were in charge of health in America? That's one of those questions people wondered about when he was running for office and then when he was bartering as a longtime Democrat, trying to get close to Trump and then saying he wanted to get the job he now has. Well, he assured people in his testimony in getting the job he wouldn't do what he's now doing, which brings us to these headlines. HHS Secretary Kennedy ousting the entire expert panel for vaccines at the CDC. These are the nonpartisan experts, the people that you want medically dealing with this stuff, not the politicians. And by the way, they review the science, they vote on the process, and then the public can either rely on that or not, because it's still a free country. The only question is whether you want medical experts and doctors and scientists doing this for your review or not. And these politicians apparently don't. They're out, all of them. RFK ousting them, a kind of an anti-science, anti-doctor purge. He'll now pick the replacement. And I want to show you it breaks the promise which he made to Senator Cassidy in order to get that vote under oath in the confirmation process. Cassidy cited that very vow as the reason he did vote for RFK Jr.
It confirmed he will maintain the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices recommendations without changes.
Without changes has turned into all of them are gone. Now, it may not be an enforceable thing, and people can come up with all kinds of wiggle words about what they said under oath, but he was under oath, and he did break that vow. There are protesters who are upset about this going to agency headquarters. RFK Jr. has also ousted the FDA's top vaccine scientist, brought in one of these so-called vaccine skeptics who has had a lot of questions asked about their work and debunked statements. And he's also pulled expert guidelines for children and pregnant women about how they get COVID shots safely. And then there is all of the debunked falsehoods.
I knew in May of 2020 that the vaccines were not going to protect against transmission because I was actually reading the monkey studies. There's 25% of Americans who believe that they know somebody who was killed by a COVID vaccine. Killed. 25% of Americans. It used to be when you and I were kids, everybody got measles. And the measles gave you lifetime protection against measles infection. The vaccine doesn't do that.
This is who Donald Trump picked. The buck stops with him. This is what the Trump administration is doing day in and day out, against the backdrop of other admittedly important standoffs, like whether the National Guard and Marines are in the streets or whether they cut health care and all these other things we're covering. But in the background is the whittling away of medical expertise and science, which affects everyone and especially children.
RFK Jr. didn't just break a promise, he gutted the CDC of science. Swapping out experts for conspiracy cronies, he's turned public health into political theater. This is Trumpism's long game. Destroy expertise, weaponize ignorance. The consequence? Millions misled, children endangered, and science silenced by fanaticism.
Prosecutors now entered the 5th week of testimony against defendant Sean Diddy Combs in this sex trafficking trial. Lawyers for Combs now cross-examining one of his former girlfriends under an alias, Jane. So in court and here in the news, we're not releasing the identity. But what they've tried to do was undermine what was her testimony about what she says were traumatic experiences while with Combs. Experts say her testimony could prove critical to to the allegations about the sex trafficking portion. Some of this evidence, of course, against Combs is not necessary to involve witnesses, like graphic video of him beating one other ex-girlfriend. But here, Jane told the court that the mogul would coerce her to have sex with these male escorts during hotel nights, and she said Combs assaulted her. So unlike the video of a different woman, this is testimony, a person saying in court, they were also separately physically assaulted. Now, there was a pretty heated exchange today where the defense was insinuating that this individual participated in those so-called hotel nights consensually and also accepted gifts, and that basically this was just a part of their version of a consensual relationship. Jane said, with regard to whether she was getting anything, no, I got trauma, and then called for a break to collect herself after that tense exchange. The prosecution also pointed to written text messages where she told Combs that she wanted the hotel nights to end. Now, that matters in a case like this because you may have personal social relationships, but that is what they call contemporaneous evidence that she wanted out or opposed what was happening. Quote, I don't want to play this role in your life anymore, she wrote at the time, according to this 2023 text message submitted to court. Quote, it's dark, sleazy, and makes me feel disgusted with myself, end quote, she wrote at the time. Now, Jane is one of the 28 witnesses that's already taken the stand. You can see it's just a very big case in that sense. Many describe what the prosecution wants to prove here, that this went beyond the interactions between people, whatever their personal style or personal tastes were, and rather reflected an illegal hierarchy where there was a person at the top in Mr. Combs who was violent and coercive and used both physical violence and other types of potentially unlawful coercion to get people to do that which they did not want or legally consent to do. We should note Combs has pleaded not guilty to all 5 charges, which include racketeering as well as trafficking. We will stay on this case, keep reporting on it for you, and we'll be right back.
As testimony in Diddy's trial peels back the glamour to reveal coercion and abuse, we must confront the systems that shield power from consequence. The courtroom is exposing not just a man, but an industry complicit in silence. Justice isn't just overdue, it's on trial with him.
The Trump administration's immigration escalation is out of the Project 2025 playbook, something that even Trump officials denied would guide this second term when we asked about it. Why do so many parts of the Republican platform overlap with 25? And we can put examples on the screen for you, including, as I think you know, abortion.
It's very simple. President Trump has said he has nothing to do with Project 2025. There are a lot of groups out there on both the right and the left who come up with policy initiatives.
What do you say to people who can read these two things and say, okay, Trump and the platform are basically 25 on abortion?
Look, I know nothing about Project 2025.
Project 2025 has absolutely nothing to do with the past, present, or future. President Trump and President Trump alone will make his own policies.
Heritage does such an incredible job, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do.
That is at least partly happening. One of those voices, Mr. Miller, denying 25, but the Wall Street Journal reporting just today how much he's pushed for this type of crackdown. We will stay on the story. That's our time. The weeknight starts now. Hi, everyone.
Trump denies Project 2025, yet echoes it word for word. From immigration crackdowns to rolling back rights, the GOP's future reads like a dystopian draft. Denial doesn't mask alignment. This isn't policy. It's a plan to end pluralism. Trump isn't distancing himself. He's marching in lockstep with extremism. Let's be clear. What we're witnessing right now in California isn't about immigration. It's not about order. And it's definitely not about protecting the American people. What we're seeing is Donald Trump's long-desired authoritarian wet dream. A domestic deployment of U.S. Marines into American cities, not for national defense, but for political theater and personal revenge. This isn't a drill. This is fascism in real time. The footage from Los Angeles should send chills down every American's spine. 700 Marines, and now over 4,000 National Guard troops patrolling the streets without state request or legal precedent. It's not just unprecedented, it's unconstitutional. Governor Gavin Newsom has filed an emergency restraining order, California is suing, and legal scholars from both parties are screaming the obvious. This is illegal. This is authoritarian overreach. And yet Trump doubles down. Why? Because he wants the fight. He's not deploying Marines to calm protests. He's deploying them to provoke more. He knows he's losing the narrative, so he creates a crisis. Just like January 6th, Trump is once again testing the limits of American democracy. The Posse Comitatus Act, the long-standing law that bars the use of federal military forces for domestic law enforcement, is being trampled. Why? Because Trump wants to use the military against Americans who disagree with him. It's the same man who once asked if he could shoot protesters in the legs, now deploying warfighters to enforce his will on U.S. soil. Let's call it what it is: state-sponsored intimidation. And where are the Republicans, the so-called Party of States' Rights? Silent, complicit, or worse, cheering him on. Meanwhile, RFK Jr., Trump's anti-science puppet in a lab coat, is gutting our vaccine infrastructure, purging expert panels, and replacing them with conspiracy-touting loyalists. The man who swore under oath he wouldn't touch the CDC's immunization committee, he's fired the whole board. Trump didn't just bring the virus, he's bringing back the disease of ignorance. And in case you thought the GOP's moral rot was exclusive to Trump, let's not forget the other MAGA monster on display, Diddy, accused in federal court of sex trafficking, coercion, and physical abuse. It's just another part of the grotesque culture Trumpism enables, where power, wealth, and male dominance shield predators from accountability. And then there's the quiet, sinister backdrop to it all. Project 2025, the extremist roadmap drafted by the Heritage Foundation, designed to systematically dismantle democracy in a second Trump term. The Trump team denies its influence, yet every step, every policy, every crackdown matches it perfectly. From immigration raids targeting day laborers to the deployment of federal troops, Trump is turning these pages into reality. Let's stop pretending this is about border control. This is about control. Period. The kind that smothers dissent, criminalizes protest, and weaponizes patriotism as a bludgeon against the Constitution. America is at a breaking point. Senator Cory Booker nailed it when he said, "We are not a nation governed by the whims of a president. But with the courts hesitant, Republicans mute, and Marines in our streets, the only firewall left is us. Every protest sign, every lawsuit filed, every act of peaceful resistance. It all matters now more than ever. Because if we let Trump get away with this, if we normalize this grotesque theater of fear, he will not stop." The question isn't whether Trump has gone too far. The question is whether America is still willing to pull him back, because make no mistake, this is not a test. This is the authoritarian takeover we were warned about, and it's already underway.